is, but I'll just read a little bit of a bio. Is, of course, a longtime Dorset Tzedek member. She is the Sophia Moses Robeson Professor Emerita of Jewish Studies and History at Wellesley College. She was the chair of Jewish Studies at Wellesley College for many years. She's the author of numerous books and co-founder of a Geo-Museum of North African and Middle Eastern Jewish life, which is very cool. And this is going to be my faux French accent. She was named Chevalier dans l'Ordre des Palmes Académiques by the French Ministry of Education in 2012. And she was working on this project, this translation and editing of Mazaltob for years, and actually presented at Shavuot a few years ago, I remember. When it was embryonic. So I'm so thrilled that it's here. I forgot my copy, so I will bring it later to get signed. So we're going to hand out some selections from it.
Your copy's already signed.
Mine is already signed?
Well, your Mazaltob copy is signed.
Oh, it is signed, that's right, so I don't have to bring it again. Yeah, I'm all good, I'm just forgetting. So, with no further ado, Francis Malino.
Thank you. I don't remember when I was born, but the day that I was born, there was a blizzard, not a rainstorm. I was born in Danbury, Connecticut, and my father put my mother on a sled, and it was downhill from where we lived to the hospital, and that's, so driving here, I was thinking, well, it's not snowing, that's at least a benefit. So thank you, Rabbi Tova, for inviting me to speak on Mazel Tov, and I have to say that it's a fun way to spend one's birthday, and I was happy to do it. And I knew it was my birthday when she suggested the date, but I thought, that's good, that's fun. So I have a plan as to some of the points I want to make before we open up to looking at the handouts and discussing them. But I really would love it if you have a question while I'm talking, just raise your hand, because nothing is scripted so much that I have to stick to this, and if something isn't clear or if you just want to pursue it. There's someone here, I won't point, but there's someone here who's actually been to the town where Mazel Tov takes place, Tetouan, which is amazing because you almost never meet anyone who's been to Tetouan or who knows where Tetouan is on the map. So I think because I can't tell how many people are on Zoom, but because some of you might have read the novel, some of you might have gone to a book talk, and some of you might not have read the novel and might not have gone to the book talk, I'll give some background, which might be a little bit familiar to some of you, but maybe not. And then we'll go to a discussion with the handouts of her feminist perspective. But please interrupt at any point. So I just want to remind you that in the very beginning that Mazel Tov is a complex novel. It's a little novel. I mean, it's really teeny, but it's very complex. And it is simultaneously an ethnography, which I think is clear if you've read it, a morality tale, and a fable of female enslavement and liberation. So we'll touch those points towards the end when we talk about the themes.
Just you stand close, just stand over.
Stand over here a little more, is that better? Is that okay for everyone over here? Oh, okay, I'll move over here. So let's begin with who was Blanche Bendahan, the author of Mazel Tov. She was born in Oran in 1893, and Oran is a port city in northwest Algeria. It may be familiar to you because of Albert Camus, who wrote about Oran and wrote about Algeria. And she was born to a Catholic mother, a 19-year-old unwed who died in childbirth, and was adopted by Hayo Ben Noliel when she was 2 months old. So I don't think it takes too much cleverness to presume that a 22-year-old adopting a 2-month-old, he's the father. So there's obviously no written evidence. And Oran is an interesting city. It's not a large city, but it's incredibly diverse in its population. And for some of you who might not know or remember, France colonized Algeria in 1830 and then made it part of France, all of Algeria part of France in 1848. So when Blanche Bendahan was born, she was born in France, even though it was Algeria. She spent her early years in France with her father. They traveled from city to city. And when she was 3 years old, he married a woman named Marie Hortense Chinou. And I spent a lot of time trying to find some information on this woman. If you remember the book, Blanche Bendahan dedicates the book to Madame Marie Chinou, a Catholic who so tenderly guided my childhood. I dedicate this Jewish novel. So it's a very straightforward point she is making. So who was this woman? Not clear. I suspect she was probably a teacher in one of the schools, but in any event, she came from a pretty respected family, and that I know because they were divorced subsequently, and it has on the papers what her father did, but not what she did, of course. So Bendahan came back to Oran at the age of 14 and stayed there until 1962, when she and almost all the Jews living in Algeria left for France. And she became known in Oran, but really known internationally in her late 20s and early 30s. And she was known as a feminist. She was involved in international feminist organizations. She was known as a brilliant poet, and her poetry had won awards, but she had never written a novel. She was, according to an Algerian historian, at the vanguard of both Jewish and feminist modernity. She was 37 when she completed Mazaltob. And what's interesting is that the date that Mazaltob appeared was the anniversary of the colonization of Algeria. So I don't know what was going on actually in her mind and whether there was something correlating to that or not. But it was published in 1930, Mazaltob, and in 1931, the Académie Française awarded it a prize, which was very prestigious. And the reviews were very, very positive. There were, I think, 58 prizes from the Academy that year. And not only Bendahan wrote on a Jewish topic, and only Bendahan was Jewish. So she stood out. One other thing I want to mention about Iran, One other thing I want to mention about Iran, because it appears in Mazaltob, and I might not get to discuss it, or you might not ask questions about it, and that is that Iran had a very diverse population. There were indigenous Muslims in Iran, there were indigenous Jews in Iran, and then there were French Catholics who came over to take advantage of the fact that Algeria was now part of France. They were called Pieds Noirs, and they brought with them the colonizers' attitude and a great deal of anti-Semitism. So Iran was a hotbed of anti-Semitism during the Dreyfus Affair and subsequently in the early 1920s. So you find in the book discussions about Catholicism and Judaism and bringing them together. That bears no relation to Tetouan, where the book takes place. It's all about Iran and Blanche Bendahan's experience living there. So what is Mazaltob about? This is all kind of introduction before we get it. Mazaltob is not set in Iran. It's set in turn of the 20th century Tetouan. And Tetouan was completely different from Iran. In Iran, you have this diverse population. You have a lot of Christians. You have Jews from Livorno. You have Jews from the Ottoman Empire. Not so in Tetouan. Tetouan was a town of about 35,000 at the time, maybe 6,000 Jews. And most of the population of Tetouan at the turn of the century were those who were descended from those who had been expelled, Muslims and Jews, from Spain. So Tetouan in northern Morocco was an Andalusian city, and it had Andalusian culture. The music was Andalusian. It was a sort of Spanish Renaissance transported to northern Morocco. And so the Jews and Muslims in Tetouan, although separate, and Jews were separate as people of the book, dhimmi, nevertheless, they shared a great deal in Tetouan, the Jews and Muslims did, very different from Iran. And you have in Mazaltob the merging of the two. So the story is familiar to those, obviously, those of you who have read the book, but also familiar to probably everyone, because the story can be seen as a Romeo and Juliet, can be seen as a tale familiar in different cultures of unrequited love or problematic relations between a young man and a young girl. In Mazaltob, we have the tale of a beautiful young girl whose liberation from a cherished yet suffocating environment becomes a question of life and death. She's 16 years old. Her parents have fallen on hard times. They have 8 children with a 9th coming. And along comes this hedonistic Tetouani Jew who now lives in Buenos Aires named José Halfan, and he wants to marry Mazaltob. And the parents, of course, don't discuss it with Mazaltob, but agree. So she is married to this 40-year-old, rather boorish type. And she herself, at the age of 16, is highly educated because she went to the Alliance Israélite Universelle School in Tetouan. And the Alliance established its first school in Tetouan. So that was the first of its schools. She also has a soulmate named Jean. And Jean, like the author, has a Jewish parent and a Catholic parent. And in the introduction, I say that there's no doubt in my mind that Jean is actually a stand-in for Blanche Bendahan in the novel. And I thought this before I knew what Bendahan's middle name was, which is Jean. So I don't think there's any doubt about it. Let me give you just a quick introduction to the Alliance, because the Alliance plays a great role in the novel. I mean, it's sort of hidden at times, but it's always there. And it's there because that is where Mazaltob got her education, but it's also operating as an alternative perspective for what women can do and become. And there's no doubt in my mind also that Blanche Bendahan combed the Alliance archives to get information about turn-of-the-century Tetouan. And I found in the Alliance Israélite Universelle Library a copy of Mazaltob. That's how I first found out about Mazaltob, that she had dedicated to the Alliance. So the Alliance plays an important role. And would someone like to just read the first of the handouts? Oh, did we give out the handouts?
We did. I just want to give people a reading. Folks on Zoom, there's a link in the chat to the handout. Who wants to read?
So this is the call that was put out in 1860 of 6 highly educated, emancipated Jews to the Jews of the world.
Alliance mandate. If you believe that a great number of your co-religionists, overcome by 20 centuries of misery, of insults and prohibitions, can find again their dignity as men, win the dignity of citizens, if you believe that one should enlighten those who have been blinded and not abandon them, raise those who have been exhausted and not rest with pitying them, defend those who have been calumniated, and not remain silent, rescue all those who have been persecuted, and not only talk about the persecution. If you believe in all these things, Jews of the world, come hear our appeal, join our organization, and give us your help.
Thanks. So you can perhaps think, well, this is maybe a colonialist endeavor of sorts. Maybe not as clear in what you read, but subsequently in some of the publications of the Alliance. But that would be too simplistic an interpretation. The Alliance, when it was founded, was complicated. It was influenced by the Jewish Enlightenment, the Haskalah. It was influenced by the fact that a generation earlier, the Jews had been, for the first time, emancipated as citizens. And so there was a kind of quid pro quo. They were emancipated, but they were expected to conform to the culture and the values of the nation state which they were living. And also importantly, although more hidden, was that there was a precariousness to the situation of the Jews in Europe at the time. And the thought that maybe these Jews, 1 million Jews living in North Africa and the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, who were living in unproblematic circumstances, might unduly influence those who were questioning whether the Jews should really be welcomed. So the Alliance was only subsequently in the 1920s, maybe even in the 1930s, more tied to France and therefore more involved in a colonialist perspective. In the beginning, when it was formed, that was not what was at its core. 1860. And it came after two heartrending situations. There was a Damascus blood libel in which a number of Jews were murdered because they were accused of killing a monk and using his blood for ritual purposes. And then there was, in 1858, the Mortera kidnapping case. I don't know if it rings a bell with any of you, where it was a pretty affluent Jewish family in Italy, and they had a non-Jewish servant, and she thought that this young Mortera boy was dying, so she baptized. She said, there's no proof she actually did it, that she had baptized him. Once baptized, the Inquisition came and took him from his home. And the family could not get him back, even though there was an international uproar among the Jews of Europe. So these were catalysts to the call that you just read, to people unite and let's take care of our fellow Jews. And so there was a twofold goal. One goal was through diplomatic lobbying, these Jews would come to the aid of each other. And the other goal was that they decided, because of that precariousness, but also because they wanted to export what they had just been given, i.e. emancipation, that they would establish a network of schools from Tetouan to Tehran. And these schools would be taught in French. They would be modeled after the French schools that had just been established in Republican France. And they would also have, so they were sort of Jewish day schools because they would be in French, but there was also Hebrew and Jewish history taught. And the Alliance was extraordinarily successful. There were 183 schools by the First World War, literally from Tetouan to Tehran, throughout the whole of the Middle East. And there were about 50,000 students in these schools, and about 30,000 members of the Alliance throughout the world. There was even an Alliance community in, or I'm mixing my French, comité, a committee in Keokuk, Iowa. So it really...
And they educated boys and girls?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Boys and girls, yes. And
which at the time, I mean, for Jewish education was probably ahead of its time, I would imagine.
Very much so.
Because in the Orthodox world, only the boys would have been educated.
Right, and there was, of course, a problem in some of these traditional towns around educating boys in these schools, but nobody cared about the girls. So, so they were competing with the traditional schools for boys. But if you wanted to get a job and you wanted to advance, an Alliance school education was going to help you, especially given the fact that Europe was now very much present in the Middle East. One last point, which is who were the teachers? And I think this is important because I think that the model for Mazaltob that Blanche Bendahan had was, in fact, an Alliance teacher in Tetouan. So who were the teachers? The Alliance thought they would have all these French men and women volunteering to go live in various towns and cities in North Africa and the Middle East. And nobody wanted to go. So that failed as a possibility. And so the second thought was, well, we will handpick the smartest of these young boys and girls, take them at the age of 14, bring them to France, keep them there for 4 years, send them to rigorous normal schools. They will take the exams that all French teachers have to take at the end of the year, and they will get their degrees. But in addition, they will have degrees in Hebrew and Jewish history. They will commit for 10 years, just the way teachers in France committed to teaching for 10 years, and will bring them back 4 years later, ready to teach. So from the ages of 14 to 18 or a little older, these young boys and girls never saw their parents. And when they did return home, their parents saw a Europeanized child and not a child from Tetouan or even from Oran. And not surprisingly, there was a great deal of loneliness and a sense of being abandoned on the part of the teachers in the beginning. But interestingly, I did a lot of research, and I'm not going to go into any of it now, but interestingly, the men were less capable than the women because there were other opportunities for young men than being an Alliance teacher. But this was an incredible opportunity for young women. So they were unbelievably brilliant. And more importantly, they were also ferociously independent. And they had been exposed in France to the feminist movement and that prevailed in France and in Paris, and they brought it with them. They called themselves feminists, and they advocated on behalf of their female students and were very comfortable standing up to Paris because, they're in their comfortable armchairs, they were making decisions, and these women, knew much better what was going on the ground. So these women were really ferociously independent women, and I see Blanche Bendahan as very similar to them in the sense that they had a complicated identity because they were Orientals, which had a pejorative feeling to it, Orientals in the eyes of the Europeans. They were feminists, advocating, and participating in feminist organizations. So they were Orientals, they were feminists, but they were also Orientalists. And Blanche Bendahan, I think, has all three as well. And it's not easy to combine being Oriental, feminist, and Orientalist at the same time. So a couple of extra points about why did we choose to do this translation, and our process, a couple of points about our process, a funny point about our failed process. So I was in the Alliance, as I said, and I was flipping through some material and I discovered an old, sort of worn copy of Mazaltob. And as I flipped through it and saw that it took place in Tetouan, you don't find many things taking place in Tetouan, and I knew a great deal about 1900 Tetouan. I thought, I'm going to take this home with me and do something with it. So I made a photocopy and brought it home, and it went into my closet, and it sat there for many, many years. And then COVID comes, and I couldn't get into my office at Wellesley, which was in the library, because of COVID, because I wasn't teaching, and they didn't let anyone on campus who wasn't teaching. And I was in the middle of writing a book, and it was all in my office, and I couldn't get at it. So that was that. And so then I remembered I had Mazaltob in my closet. So I reread it very carefully, and I realized that I needed a partner, that this was literature. I'm an historian. I will think like an historian, and I don't think like someone who is working on literature. So I made some contacts and questions, and then thanks to Matilda, who can't be here because she's out west with a new grandchild, thanks to Matilda, I was put in touch with Yaelle Azagury, who is from Tangier, who received her BA in Paris, received her PhD in Columbia in literature, lives in Stamford, Connecticut, and has an original copy of Mazaltob. So what beshert. So, so Yaelle and I never met for the first year and a half, and we just did everything by telephone. We put the phones down and we spoke. I had no idea even what she looked like. She had no idea what I looked like, and together, without even meeting for the close to a year, we translated Mazaltob, and I wrote the introduction, she wrote the ending essay, and we got it published. So the whole process from beginning to end was about 4 years, but Mazaltob sat for an awful long time in my closet before that. So just a couple of issues we faced in translation. The funny one is the map. So there's a map, if you've seen Mazaltob, it's not a large map, but what was important to us is we wanted to have a map that showed Oran and Tetouan. And she didn't need a map in her copy of Mazaltob that Bendahan published, because everyone knew where Oran was and Tetouan was, who lived in France. This was familiar territory. You colonized it or you took it over in one form or another. But Americans don't know where Oran and Tetouan are. So we put in a map. What we didn't notice when we put in the map came up in Tangier. So we had a book launch in Tangier at the American legation, and the head of the bookstore who was sponsoring it at the American legation was going over the books because we were selling copies there, and she said, "We can't sell these." And it was because of the map. And the map shows the Western Sahara, which the Abraham Accords say now is recognized as part of Morocco, showed it as part of Algeria. So poof, went the map. So we cut out the map in every copy we sold in Tangier. But stupidly, we didn't think of that. You know, we were so intent on getting Oran and Tetouan in the map. And we have a problem. We still haven't gotten the publisher to get rid of the map. And Yaelle's mother lives in Tangier, and it's not a funny thing for Moroccans. They take this very seriously. So unfortunately, when they do remove the map, they'll remove the dedication to her stepmother, which is too bad. A couple of other issues we faced in the translation. One was the delicate task of balancing between the quaint and alien and the familiar. How do you balance the two? And we also often chose, even when when Bendahan didn't, to hold on to the residual foreignness. So Bendahan changes preciada to précieuse, which it happened a lot in Jewish families. When the French came, all of a sudden, Moses becomes Moïse, and you have, instead of Mazaltob, you have Masodi. And so the names were changing to make them more mellifluous and sometimes more French. So Bendahan does that. So it's a translation a little bit, her book is, and we went back to the précieuse, and we went back to the preciada, not the précieuse. Also, there's, on page 29, you don't have to look at it, there's besinmantob, which is what we put in, which means good wishes. But Bendahan has besimantov, so she spells it differently and it's pronounced differently. We changed it to retrieve the sound of Hakatia, which was the language that the Jews of Tetouan spoke. So these are minor things which were important to us.
So you're translating from French or
Yes.
from a mix of languages?
A good question, Pierre. You always ask good questions. Yes, yes. From French, but the original has expressions which are in Hakatia, and there are expressions in Spanish. So there's a hybridity in this novel of language, a very rich hybridity, which speaks to the Sephardi Jewish experience.
Hakatia is related to Spanish or related to Arabic?
Hakatia?
Yeah.
So Hakatia is basically Spanish when they were expelled from Spain. So they start out and they're expelled from Spain, and the Jews who go to the Ottoman Empire, you have Ladino developing. But the Jews who stay in Tetouan are influenced by Arabic. So they have different ingredients, but the base was the same. Yep. So we also changed. Bendahan had Masiach for their last name. We went back to the original Hakatiya, which would Masias. So these are minor things which just we were doing because that's what we wanted to do, and probably no reader notices. But we also kept the expressions of the chorus, which is, it's unusual, and we like that. We like to do that. But we had one reviewer who felt that we didn't do this enough, that we should have kept more of it to give the feeling even more than what we did. And then there's the cover. And we struggled with this cover, which, for those of you who haven't seen the book, we originally had a photograph of a young woman, probably from Tetouan, maybe Tangier, the right period, beautiful young woman. But the problem was we were 99% sure she was Jewish, but she might not have been. And the other problem was that I kind of felt uncomfortable using a photograph for a fictional figure. So we just went through painting after painting, Orientalist painting after painting, until we found this by Charles Landel. And what's good about it is it gives us the Orientalist gaze. So we're looking at Mazaltob in a variety of ways, including through the lens of an Orientalist. Wow. I could turn to Sue, who could give you, what? You're not, Sue isn't saving me. I'm going to be Right, okay, so what is Orientalist? Or how am I using Orientalist? And Orientalist is a complicated term right now, and I will be pithy and simplify it. So Blanche Bendahan was an Orientalist, and I say an Orientalist gaze. I'm using the term more as somebody who was interested in the Orient, in North Africa and the Middle East. Delacroix, his works were, and ethnographers who were writing about North Africa and the Middle East. They were Orientalists. They studied Arabic. They studied the languages. They were very knowledgeable. But then there's another meaning of Orientalist, which is from Edward Said, which speaks to the ways in which the West divides the world between us and them, and with a pejorative them and a presumption of superiority of us. Was that pithy enough? So,
Sorry. When you say she was an Orientalist, you're using the first meaning. I mean,
yes.
She's interested in the culture and
right.
yeah.
Well, there.
She's French, but she's not really French. I mean, it's kind of complicated.
Right. It's so much more complicated with her because she is also an Oriental, and she's an Orientalist in the traditional term of Orientalist. I mean, like he is an Orientalist painter. But what Sue's saying is you can't really separate it because there is a presumption of superiority. Or otherness. And I agree with that. I think it's hard to separate it except chronologically, and this is a historian in me, one comes before the other. But you could even say that the Alliance was really very interested in, and could be seen as Orientalist in its publications of the customs and mores of the Jews living in North Africa and the Middle East. But it was also Orientalist in a Said way. There's no doubt about it. It didn't begin that way, but it grew into it. So it's a slippery slope. How about we say that? Okay, finally, a couple of points about the themes, and then we'll look at the rest of the handouts. There are multiple themes in Mazaltob. It may be a little book, but it's really rich in the themes it covers. There's romanticism, anti-Semitism, colonialism, and hints of Jewish enlightenment, of the Haskalah. There's a plea for religious pluralism, wonderful discussions about that. There's a feminist commentary, which we're going to focus on for the rest of the time. And there's the beauty of time-honored Sephardi culture and traditions. And there's also an erotically charged atmosphere. Doesn't hit you in the face, but it's definitely there. And finally, Mazaltob is also autobiographical. I really feel strongly that Bendahan is navigating a lot of the issues she's struggling with, and she's facing herself in this novel. And we can talk about it later. Yaelle and I differed only in this, that I came to this and I said it's definitely autobiographical, and Yaelle is a purist in literature, and she said that's not relevant. And I said, oh, but for a historian, it's so relevant. But I missed one in this, so it's not in my introduction, and I'll just read you this and you can figure out who she's talking about. You wouldn't need me. So there's the uncle in Mazaltob is very much, I think, modeled after Bendahan's father. And this is what I thought, and this is what I said in the introduction, but I missed this, which is he, the uncle, is speaking. Number 2, we are thoroughly wholesome, we meaning Tetouani Jews. Oh, I am speaking not of our physical health, which is preserved by the exacting requirements of kosher food, but of our moral health. Vice here goes up in smoke. I have never, in my many years of living in this city, even heard of adultery. And do you know anyone among our people who would impregnate an unmarried girl? So, it went by me. Now, it might have subconsciously influenced my feeling that this was definitely also, and, he goes on and on, but, she goes on and on, putting words in his mouth. And I just want to end by Lauren Gibbs's, and then we'll get into the feminist side of all this. Lauren Gibbs' comment about Mazaltob, because I thought it was so wonderful. She said, I found the book to be a Jewish Romeo and Juliet, but focused on gender, Jewish ritual, the duty to parents, and love, rather than on stopping tribal warfare and love. And I think that's really such a good statement. Okay, so now to the, yeah, please.
What was the reception like? Did you just find this kind of lost thing, or was it actually
Oh, very known. I would love to sell as many copies of Mazaltob that she sold. Not going to happen. It was very well reviewed in the journals, both in the left-leaning, right-leaning. It was a bit in to be interested in 1930, which is when this came out, in things Jewish. We are so aware of what happens in the late 30s and on that we forget that it wasn't always that way, and that in the earlier period, and in 1930, for example, there was a lot of interest in things Jewish. And so the very fact that it was given a prize by the Académie Française, and her poetry, she had wonderful books of poetry, which I could not translate because this is beyond my ability. It's really, but there's a wonderful sentence apropos of her feminism and apropos of the politics of today and what people are accused of, which she says in one of her humorous poems, the more I know men, the more I love my cat. And I thought, oh my God, I wished I had been able to speak to her, which I could have. She died in Nice in 1975, and so it would have been possible to do that. Okay, so why don't we now, what time is it? We have a little time left, don't we? Yeah, so the handouts I gave you are sort of feminist perspectives in Mazaltob, but maybe if somebody who's read Mazaltob wants to volunteer some, that's fine. Otherwise, we can take a look at what they represent and have somebody read the different ones. Does anybody who's read Mazaltob want to make any comments about the feminist perspective? No? No?
I'll say one thing, which is I was really disappointed in the ending, despite the fact that it was a... Romeo and Juliet. Sorry, if you've read Romeo and Juliet,
No, but don't tell her. Don't.
I won't tell you.
Her. You can't give it away.
But it bummed me out. I also didn't see it coming, despite the fact that I was following along with the Romeo and Juliet plot.
Right. Right.
But how do you square that with feminism? Like, she. I'll just say, like, it doesn't end well for her.
No. And the
It's
question.
not a success story of feminism.
No, it's not a success story, but feminism is, I mean, it's, I think the ending, this is very hard not to reveal the ending, but I don't want to reveal it, Paul. I really want you to get there on your own. I don't think it's a question of feminism. It's a question of what is the price one's paying in that part of the world. For this kind of freedom, and she couldn't pay it.
And my other thought was about her wedding night.
Yeah.
So there's no mention of it. It's like it didn't happen, but then later on, like it says it happened. I think later on there's some mention of, he left her, he goes back to Argentina, and the only time she was ever with him was on their wedding night.
But we don't really know if it was consummated. We know nothing. It's really blank.
Right. So you're left sort of reading into, her kind of running away from the love of her life. I was reading into that as like she was traumatized by her wedding night, and she, was afraid to, be with this man that she loved.
That could be part of it, but I think it was bigger than that.
Okay.
Bigger than that. But I think what's interesting is that the whole wedding ceremony is described in excruciating detail, the berberiska. All the details of what you do and the days you wait and the days you can't consummate and this and that. Everything is in detail, except we have no idea if they actually have any real physical interaction. So, and that's purposeful. I think she's doing this on purpose.
Wasn't there, though, specifically a line? I thought I could find it quickly, but...
Use the mic just for the folks on Zoom.
Wasn't there... I feel like I specifically remember there being a line towards the end where she's reflecting on it, and it specifically says something about like that he like tore her virginal seal or something like that. But there's like one specific line. There was a more explicit reference to the fact that they did consummate their marriage. I thought.
Good for you. That I don't remember it, but I trust you.
I just finished the book last night in preparation for this, so it's fresh on my mind.
I don't remember that line, but I mean we translated it, but I don't remember. Okay, let's look at some of the handouts. So I pulled out different sort of models that she presents us with. So the first one is is motherhood. So number 2 and number 3 are motherhood. So somebody want to read them? These are Blanche Bendahan's comments on motherhood as observed in a traditional society.
Mazaltob's mother. Mazaltob is silent. She gazes somberly at her mother's loins, full now of a deadly promise. Yes, for a woman from Tetouan, children are her whole life. But in other countries, the countries of books, 16-year-old women are still harvesting the golden fruits of joy.
Yeah, good. So Tetouan is a town, and it's very accurately portrayed in this book, but it's also a condition. And I think in reading the novel, you begin to understand that what she's describing is not just the city, it's a condition. And when Leah, who is the Ashkenazi wife of There's one Ashkenazi doctor in Tetouan. Berliaski is the real one. There was one Ashkenazi doctor in Tetouan, and he has a son who's married to Leah, an Ashkenazi woman who comes to Tetouan and doesn't last very long. She's out of there because she cannot live the constrained life. And for her, definitely Tetouan is a condition. She has to escape.
So, Fran, would Bendahan have known? That's what I was wondering. Would she have known this from her own experience, or this was just research? Like, did she? Yeah, like did the people in her community spend a week in bed after their wedding, or like was that she just knew that other Jews did that?
The question is actually a really good one, and the answer isn't simple. Okay, so the details of the Berberiska wedding ceremony were written up in great detail by a man named Meir Levi, who was a teacher of the Alliance School in Tetouan and who was from Tetouan. And he wrote it in a cahier of the Alliance Israélite Universelle, which I am sure Bendahan read, because she also published in the cahier. But he wrote it in 1900, in 1902 or whatever.
So she did her own research about...
She did her own research.
Yeah.
Her father was, and her husband was, so they were both Tetouani Jews, which means, and the Tetouani community in Oran was a very important, influential community. They really called the shots for the Jewish life in Oran. So she would no doubt go back and forth to Tetouan. So she knew Tetouan, but she knew Tetouan of 1920s and 1910. She didn't know the Tetouan that she was writing about. I am sure, but I have no proof, that she looked at the archives I've looked at and the thousands of letters from the teachers describing in detail life in Tetouan, and especially the letters from the women teachers. So she has in this book incidents which never appear in history books, never appear in anything that I've ever seen published, and only appear in those letters. So I really do think that she got access to the letters are kept. Well, now you can't look at them, you can't hold them. But when I was doing the research in the beginning, you could hold the letters, and they were, they had straight pins, keeping them together. And maybe that, I was the second one reading them, and she was the first. But her knowledge of Tetouan could not have been garnered just from visiting family in Tetouan or just from reading books. She had to have had access to primary, and I think she was reading these women's letters.
Fran, stepping back from the book, what drew you to Tetouan? What is your connection?
What is my connection to Tetouan? Well, okay, I'm going to be pithy. So I decided I wanted to try out the archives to see if I could write about the women teachers of the Alliance. And I thought, and there was one article on the women teachers, and it was 13 pages long when I decided to do this. So nobody, and everyone thought there was not much in the letters because there wasn't much in the men's letters except formal stuff. So I arbitrarily chose 5 women teachers, and the second teacher I chose, Claire Benchamal, was from Tetouan, and I fell in love with her. And so when she died in childbirth, I couldn't let her go, so I stayed with the family and followed the family generationally, and I just, when I was in Paris a few months ago, met her great-grandson. So I was living in Tetouan for many years in my head. So the next quote I think is really a really wonderful commentary by Bendahan on women's role in traditional society. Somebody want to read that? Number 3? Yeah, number 3.
The epitaphs on the graves, both in Spanish and Hebrew, all look the same. Name, date of death, and a few words of praise on the deceased's life. Like elsewhere, it is enough in Tetouan to die to be regarded as virtuous. Nevertheless, Mazaltob's mother, like countless women of other races, deserves the following inscription on her grave.
I love this inscription.
She spent her entire childhood working, helping her mother to raise her numerous family. Married off at a young age, she kept working, although she did it for herself. Between her 15th and her 38th year, she kneaded more than 10,000 kilos of bread. She prepared more than 8,000 lunches and dinners, spent 17,000 hours making preserves, and preparing traditional how do you pronounce that? Alcalay, or fried meat kept in oil. Additionally, she devoted more than 17,000 hours to cleaning the house and another 17 to sewing linens and clothing for her family. Up early, late to bed, she knew nothing of distractions, not even the most elementary walk. And throughout all those years when she ceaselessly toiled and toiled, she sacrificed her youth and her beauty to that minotaur called home. May she now rest in peace.
I mean, that really says a lot. And it also, I mean, Bendahan writes with a great deal of irony. There's always irony and double meaning, and even when she describes Mazaltov's experience at the Alliance School, she describes it as she has nostalgia for a country she will never know. I mean, which is a wonderful way of putting it. You can't have nostalgia for a country you'll never know or you've never seen. But she plays with it, and this is one of my favorite. Another, which is really interesting, is surrogate parents. Bendahan clearly has a strong feeling about surrogate parenting, and it comes out there's Madame Girard in the novel, who is her voice teacher, who is a surrogate to Mazaltov, a surrogate mother to Mazaltov. There's Dr. Bralikov, the one Ashkenazi doctor. Oh, and what she does also, she keeps the same letter of the alphabet, the first letter of the alphabet in the name. So the real doctor in Tetouan at the time, the real Ashkenazi doctor was Berliowski. In her novel, it's Bralikov, but it's B. And Madame Girard has a G, and Marie Ginou, who was her stepmother, also has a G. So there's a lot to see here. So Dr. Bralikov and his nephew, Jean. So there's another surrogate parenting. And then Mazaltov and her youngest sibling after the mother's death, there's surrogate parenting there. So she really explores that in a number of ways. Another one of my favorites is Charles Balder, who is a friend of Jean, who comes to speak to Mazaltov. He also is very curious about Judaism. He's Catholic, but he comes to speak to Mazaltov about herself and who she is and whom she must become. So someone want to read? That's number 4.
Rest assured, madam, you are like those statues which an artist gradually chisels out of the thickness of Carrara marble. I can already make out the thrust, the face, and a few body lines. The rest is dormant within the block of marble in which it is imprisoned. Your soul soars toward higher spiritual regions, and you have turned your face toward love. But the gang, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But the gang of marble still enshrouds you. Have courage, please. Keep fashioning yourself. Soon you will break free of the mold. The Juderia will no longer detain you.
Yeah, I think that's quite beautiful. Yeah, it's a wonderful metaphor. The stone, and there's a lot of stone in Tetouan, and and tradition encased in stone. So it's a very beautiful way of describing it. And then there's Mazaltov herself, who struggles with who she is. And somebody want to read? That's number 5.
Oh, yeah, sure. Just connecting this last excerpt, number 4, to the feminist approach. Keep fashioning yourself. She is her own sculptor, so she's the material and the sculptor. And I think that in the context of gender and her feminism, I think is very relevant.
Right.
Why have I scorned happiness, wonders Mazaltob every so often. Who would have wept if I had listened to my heart and had become the wife of my childhood companion? My mother is dead. In my father's life, rife with the screams of my stepfather, there is little room for me. Preciada, her children, her husband, and her household, all are a buffer between us. Uncle Solomon, my aunts, my cousins, they are old. Alas, no one requires that vain sacrifice of me. And you, Jean, who hauls your moribund life across the ocean, Jean, will you ever forgive me, my light?
Yeah, continue. I just omitted a few paragraphs. And then she goes on.
It's because of me his life is shattered, because of me. And Mazaltob curses herself. Why did she banish Jean? Why did she fight her desire to see him again? What fallacious grasp of the word duty gave her the right to make someone suffer? Nevertheless, you did the right thing, approves the sectarian God of her childhood. Jean does not believe in me. No, you have sinned, counters the other God, the God of logic who loves all his children equally, be they Christian, Jewish, or simply deistic, that God who loves even the atheist. Mazaltob descends into her soul's depths and plumbs them ceaselessly, her thoughts groping, reaching out for each argument as to jagged edges of a rock. Suddenly, the beautiful Jewish girl lifts up her head as though Eureka had been whispered in her ears. Into her ears, she knows. Now she knows that the one who rebelled against love is the other Mazaltob, the woman from Tetouan, the one who held captive by the Juderia, not physically but spiritually.
Yeah. So that's a real struggle, and it's, I think, a struggle that, we don't have access to often among Jewish writers because they're mostly men. And very rarely did we have Jewish women writing in North Africa and the Middle East and able to express this kind of struggle, but it's powerful and poignant. The last quote is, I think that Mazaltob is modeled after this young woman, Hasiba Koryat, who was an Alliance teacher. She was younger than Claire, the woman I told you about, and she came back from Paris and became an assistant to Claire. And she wrote this unbelievable essay on the history of women and what women could become. And it was, full of all this hope and enthusiasm. Women could be lawyers, they could be doctors, they could be this, they could be that. And then she also had a family of 9 children, just the way Mazaltob did. And the family had fallen on hard times. The father, I believe, had died. And she was married off to a young man, not as old as poor Mazaltob, also from, I think, Buenos Aires. And so there we have an alternative. She married him. She was very beautiful, according to the people I interviewed about who knew her and were related to her. But he made her give up her career. And so it was over for her. She was going to be a wife and have children, but there was no possibility of continuing to be a teacher. And he paid the Alliance off for the years that she didn't fulfill her promise, because it's 10 years. So that was an alternative to Mazaltob, but that alternative isn't good either. But I think that is the model for Mazaltob, or the Hasiba was the model. And in the end of that last quote, I have, in her essay, she offered another more radical model. And this one was free, as were the new women Hasiba would have observed in Belle Epoque, Paris, to choose any profession, whether that of teacher, couturier, doctor, merchant, or even lawyer. So this was an ambition being thwarted. We don't have that in Mazaltob. She hasn't gotten to that. She doesn't have that ambition. So I just want to, any other questions before I just had a concluding sentence?
Maybe this is more of a Yaelle question, but it's also, I mean, I'm maybe a quarter of a way in, so I have ways to go, but I mean, it's set in this very traditional setting, but it's completely like modernist. I mean, stylistically.
It is a modernist novel. It is definitely a modernist
and that's
novel.
also fascinating. So she's playing with the form, and it's modernist and not traditional at all, while she's describing these incredibly traditional things.
Absolutely.
It's an incredibly interesting choice that she made as an author to do that.
Exactly. Yaelle talks a lot about that in the concluding essay.
Okay, I'm not there yet.
Yeah, it is definitely a modernist. And you know, it's interesting because, and I mean, it's Sephardi modernist literature. That's what it is. And what was interesting is I read this novel, Passing. I don't know if you've read that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I thought, my goodness, this is similar to Mazaltob. Well, of course, it's not the same. It's not Tetouan. It's a black woman, but it is a modernist novel. Yeah. And this
Woolf is writing around this time, Virginia Woolf. I mean, it's all very
absolutely. And I mean, Blanche Bendahan taught at the Sorbonne. She was, you know, a member of international feminist organizations. She was well respected. She was brought in to speak. So she was part of this world. So here is, I mean, it really upsets our sort of prejudiced view of what was going on in that part of the world. Because here you have a woman, a North African Jewish woman, writing a Sephardi modernist novel, and it's got all of the modern traces. So it's not what we usually think of when we think of the oppressed, benighted Jews living in North Africa and the Middle East. Back to the Orientalist position.
About Tetouan. Hi, I'm so sorry. I've been to Tetouan. I spent a month there learning Arabic, and it is very much a place on. And I was there 2018, a long time after her.
I was in Morocco and in Tetouan in 2018 also.
I wonder if we passed each other by.
Briefly.
It's a place that's very much in between. It is, about 45 minutes from Tangier, and you can get very easily to both the Mediterranean on one side and the ocean on the other side. And on a good day, you can see Spain, quite literally see Spain. And so it is very much a part of Morocco, but it's also in transition to other places, and I imagine it was very similar, or at least a version of that in the 1910s, 20s, and 30s. And even today, it remains, even though so much has changed.
Yeah, good, excellent point. Yeah, and in the novel when she goes to Gibraltar, and it's just. Oh, it's so painful. So I just was going to conclude by just saying, whom does this novel speak to? And I think, it's a question I'm throwing out to you. But I got one little note from the cousin of a dear friend, and they're from a Lebanese Christian background, so it's not Jewish, and she had read Mazaltob. And she said, so much of this novel reminded me of our, meaning her and her cousin, mutual culture. How do we honor our family and traditions while forging our own path? I think that especially resonates with both you and me. And for me, one of the ways that this resonates is a number of years ago, I don't know, maybe even 10 years ago by now, we had a conference at Wellesley. Madeleine Albright and Hillary Clinton organized a conference of young women leaders in North Africa and the Middle East who came. And I remember especially this young woman from Afghanistan who was amazing, brilliant, and a political figure, and very young, in her early 20s. And we met in the ladies' room and we had a conversation. And I think about her often. And, these young girls in Afghanistan who can't have an education anymore. And this novel speaks to that. I mean, it's it's timely in a way. So, thank you.
I really appreciate your work, your life that you've devoted to these studies, and when I've come to hear you speak, it's always so fascinating to me. So thank you so much, and I look forward to reading the book. Could you just say, at the start of your talk, you said there were 3 themes I think you were going to touch on? Do you remember at the beginning of your talk?
That I was going to touch on 3 themes.
I thought so, but it's okay. I can't remember. There was feminism, and there were, I think, Orientalism.
Oh, I said there were multiple. Oh.
It's okay. Thank you anyway. It was very interesting.
I did outline the multiple themes in the book, which were many, and then, but I don't think that's what you're referring to. Yeah, it's late.
I just want to say something real quick about what you were saying about the style of the novel, because so I'm a poet, and I've noticed that poets that write novels tend to write in this particular way. I don't think it's necessarily modernist. I think it's poets writing a novel. You've got episodes. It's very poetic. It's poetic you've got stanzas, essentially. You've got poems, you've got refrains, you've got songs. There are sort of scenes, but the plot is taken whole cloth from something else. Like, she probably, I don't know. I have to say, if you read novels by poets, you will find this is what they're like.
Now, is it mutually exclusive? Could it be both modernist and this is a typical novel written by a poet?
Yes, but you could read Kaveh Akbar's new book, Martyr, with an exclamation point. He's a poet who just wrote a novel. If you read Fatima Asghar's book about, I think it's called Sisters or something like that, she's a poet who wrote a novel. And I'm trying to think of another person recently, but I've noticed it in all of them that you have like half a page or quarter of a page or maybe at most like a page and a half of a section,
That's interesting. Yeah, well, it certainly enriches the final essay to put that in, to add that in the mix, that this is typical of poets writing novels. Yeah, interesting.
That's just my theory.
And did you bring copies? You didn't bring copies?
No.
Okay. So I don't see any Zoom questions. Thanks, Zoomers. Fran, thank you so much for taking the time to share this with us. Really wonderful.
My pleasure. Thank you.
No, because I'm glad I didn't finish the novel, because I'm gonna go back to the novel and feel like I have this whole context now, even deeper. So yeah, buy the book, read the book, enjoy the book. Fran, thank you so much. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
I hope you had a good time with us. Good night to folks on Zoom. Oh yeah, we're supposed to take oh wait, want to take a picture from up here? Get one from up here, I think, also. Margaret said we have to have pictures. Maybe take this little crew over here. Yeah. Just look like you're listening really,
Everyone looks very interested in Fran.
Pretend.
Thank you for remembering. I totally forgot. That's right. Thanks again.
Well, I thank you all for coming out in this lousy weather. So I thought it was going to be Toba and I.
Thank you, fascinating.
Barbara Chapman says she's imagining the next CBT trip to Tetouan.